name's John Smith. Welcome to our cabin.
Good afternoon, Nora Sanders and Dave Russell here today, and we are pleased to present John Smith. He's welcomed us into his house, and thank you so much, John.
Well, as I understand it, the project is the history of maybe the Smiths in Port Stanley. My parents got married at Christ Church in 1936, and my mother's parents had a cottage at the end of Cornell Street, 2 cottages away from the Hillcrest Inn. So my grandfather, Albert Jennings, owned the cottage. Between him and the Hillcrest Inn was Wilf Jennings, his brother. And Wilf had a daughter, Mary Jennings, who married Ab Hammond. And the Hammonds, of course, ran the Jennings furniture store for 100 years and then sold it. And we would visit our parents, or our grandparents, at the end of Cornell Street in the summers of, I guess Mother probably went every summer from 1936 after she got married, right up until they passed in the late 50s. My first recollection would have been in the sort of 1947 or 48. We would go there, and it was a small cottage with 2 60-year-olds who weren't accustomed to a riot arriving. So I have 3 sisters, so 4 of us would arrive. Let's say we're 9 through 15, and there were always a couple of dogs and my parents. So 6 people and 2 dogs are coming into this little cottage with my grandparents. So it was fun for me. I'm not sure how much fun my grandparents had, but I slept on a couch. The girls seemed to find a bed, mother and father, but father quickly realized that this wasn't a satisfactory arrangement. So he started to look for a place himself and for our family. His original idea was a barn. He wanted us all to have our own bedroom, which was very generous of him. And he wanted space to show off his antiques. He had started collecting antiques. And a barn seemed to be a great idea with the old beams and all of. Somebody said, why don't you look at the old mill up in Selborne? And Selborne being the little village that's basically where the trailer park is across to Moore Water Gardens, was the town of Selborne. And the mill was on the other side of the Fingal Road. The pond that the Trout and Salmon Club used, the big pond there, was the pond that fed our mill. So anyway, Father went out and looked at it and fell in love with it. They turned it on for him when he was there, and he told me that the whole building shook once you got the millstone spinning. And
how long, John, then, since it had been used to grind flour?
1942 was when it went out of business. Father bought it in 49. He first of all had to find out who could move it. So a guy by the name of Cliff Gillard, who owned a pig farm where Kokomo Beach subdivision is, Cliff agreed to take it apart and reassemble it on a piece of land east of Port Stanley for $400. When they finally got it done, Gillard the bill had gotten up to $1,400, but certainly well worth the job that he did. He had to get obviously a place for the mill to go. Evelyn Harrison was the last of the Harrisons that owned the big farm that Orchard Beach is basically on. She still had 20 acres east of the last cottage, and that's the 20 acres that Father bought. And you'd have to go up Braeside, and at the end of Braeside there was a street called Lawrence that went straight south down to where there were a couple of cottages that had been demolished, but the ruins were still there. And then Father built a lane off of Lawrence up onto a hill very similar to the hill we're on now. And that's where Gillard took all the pieces and put it together.
And that was about 1950 or something?
Yeah, he bought it in the fall of 49, so the building probably, well, the building probably started in late 49 and went into 50. And coincidentally, at the same time, the Toronto subway was being built, and we were living in Toronto, and Father worked downtown, so he would go home up Yonge Street and negotiate the purchase of windows, doors, toilets, sinks, everything that you would need in a mill when you're converting it to a cottage. So all of that stuff is from downtown Toronto. So it took probably 2 years to get it livable. In those years, we would come to port for July, rent a cottage in Orchard Beach. Father would come up to the mill every morning and work all day. And I think it was about 1953 that we could move in and live there.
So after the cottage was put back together, the main structure was put back together by Guilford, your father did most of the work in
He
there?
did a lot of the work inside, but he needed an electrician, he needed a plumber. He did some of it, but he also hired people. And he had a carpenter there full time.
And what about you, John? You were a teenager at that time, or
Well,
did he make you help him out? Or?
Yeah, in 50, I was born in 43, so
Oh yeah.
in 50 I was 7. I wouldn't have been much good, but as soon as I could run and get nails or hold a board for them, which was when I was probably 11 or 12, that was what I did. And, that was contentious because I wanted to be down in Orchard Beach with friends that we had made.
And I think you said that somehow your sisters didn't have the same expectation of your sisters.
No. Now they had to help with Mother in the kitchen, but there were 3 of them for a meal, and Father would work. He didn't care. He could work certainly 12, 14 hours a day. It was fine with him.
That was his summer holiday, to come down here and work.
Yeah. And he told me on a number of occasions that he thought it saved his life because he was in a high pressure business in Toronto that eventually went broke. And he found when he came to Port Stanley and started dealing with a carpenter project with a hammer, all the problems in Toronto disappeared and he was quite at peace. So by 1954, we started looking down the hill, noticing that there was erosion. So Father knew about erosion, but he had no idea of the extent that the erosion could happen. And 1954 was also Hurricane Hazel that took a big chunk of the front of our property. So he knew he had to move. And at that point, redoing the mill would have been impossible with all the windows and toilets and doors, and it was a home. When it's an old mill, the floors were all space. But so
it couldn't have been taken apart again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
The Gillard thing was out of the question. He went to Gillard and said, "Can you move it, pick it up, and somehow move it?" And Gillard said, "I don't have that. I know." So a guy from Elmer, Norman Brooks, knew how to move old buildings, big, heavy buildings. And so he came in 56, the fall of 56, jacked it up on a network of beams, and then each of the corner had either a truck or a bulldozer, and they started to move it through the fields. And it's the same level as the current location, so there were no serious hills they got halfway. You had to move it in February when the ground was frozen and hopefully when there was not a lot of snow. And they got it halfway and blocked it up for the summer, which was unfortunate because it was broken into a number of times and a lot of stuff was stolen. And they did crazy things like they put all the old Crocs on the couch and then took flat irons and just threw them and broke all the Crocs.
That's a terrible shame.
Yeah, it was discouraging.
So the house was moved with all the contents inside.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Actually, Mother said to Brooks, now what should I do? Should I empty all the kitchen dishes and get all that and blah, blah, blah? And Brooks said, you could put a glass of water on the dining room table and we won't spill a drop.
Wow.
So
And did she?
I don't think she did.
But it only got halfway the first year? Is that
Yeah.
what you're saying? They took 2 years to move it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The second winter, which would have been 57, 58, they got it to the current location where it's been ever since.
Can you give us an idea of how much of a distance it moved the first time and then the second time?
Well, the first time is 5 miles.
Oh, no. Okay, sorry.
When the beams would be on a truck and from Selburne to here.
But in the move of the whole house, the whole mill, that
move
took
of
2
the whole
years.
mill.
Yeah, the first year and the second year.
The first year would have been 500 yards, 700 yards. The second move would have been more like a half a mile.
Wow.
So the farm was owned by George and Cliff Reichman, so he had to deal with them and guarantee that he would put the fences back up and all of that stuff. So anyway, we got here. He bought 18 acres from Ron Hepburn, who owns the little this farm. He bought the southern 18 acres for $3,000, and that would have been in 1955 or 6.
We're all surrounded by woods here. Was it farmland at that time, or was?
It was for grazing cattle.
Okay.
And it was interesting because this whole hill was trees, a lot of them fruit trees, and they were all the height of a cow. So if I walked through there, I'd have to bend over to the height of a cow because the cow's weaving through there all the time and broken any of the branches. And you could see the trails where they had moved. So Father had a bulldozer in and cleaned the whole hill off. And we went.
So then the second year when it got moved to this location, it was all set, dishes and everything are in it, you just walked in and used it?
Yeah,
Wow.
basically, yeah.
Hooked up the plumbing and,
Yeah. I mean, there's trimming outside to do, and the little shed that you see on the back corner was added after, and
It was built new, like it looks like an old place now, but it was built new?
yeah,
Yeah.
it was part of it.
And
So-
then when did this we're sitting in your log cabin house now, when did that all happen?
Well, let's get to say 1962, I'm 19, Judy's 18, Colleen's 20, and Joanne's 21. And we'd found out about beer. So, and all the kids at Orchard Beach thought going to the mill was great because that whole open space was great for a party, and we'd do blackjack and different gambling games and drink a little beer. It was all fabulous, other than Mother and Father were up in their bedroom trying to get to sleep. Father in particular, because he wanted to be up at 7 starting his working projects. He never complained, but it was obviously uncomfortable for him or awkward. So he was driving, we lived in Kitchener by that time, and he was driving here and came through Tavistock, and they were tearing down a log cabin. So he stopped and talked to the guy that was doing the work, and they agreed that he would deliver all the logs from the cabin for $100 and drop them on the lawn. So that happened. And Father and I spent that summer getting the first row in, putting the footings in and the first row of logs. Having the first row of logs perfect is important because everything's going on top of it. So then he thought the best way to get this thing done is to have a bunch of friends and people work on it. So in the fall, he had, 1962, he had the log cabin raising bee, and he made up invitations with the old antique print. And we invited all of our friends, and Father and Mother invited their friends. Father and Mother were in their 50s, so their friends were still strong. And Joanne and Colleen and Judy's friends were late teens or early 20s, so they were certainly strong. Anyway, we raised the whole cabin with the roof joists by 4:30, September 22nd, 1962.
All in one day.
All in one day, yeah.
That's
Well,
amazing.
Who knew what they were doing? Like, you had all your friends, but was it your dad that
Oh,
knew
yeah.
what to... Yeah.
Father marked all the logs, so once you have them marked, it's pretty easy to know, this is the next one, and away you go. So it all went very gracefully. It's hard to... We were living in Kitchener, which is where he got the log cabin raising bee idea, because the Mennonites were doing barn raising all the time, and all the Mennonites would come together and raise a barn in a day. So that's where the concept came. So now we had the little cabin. He paid to have the shingle roof put on, but there were all the spaces between the logs. So the next year, he decided he'd have a chinking bee. And so he got sheets of plywood 4x8 and put sides on them. And I think he had 2 of them going, and he had a formula for chink. So he'd make the chink, and people had little trays that they could carry to whatever spot of the cabin they were working on. And they chinked maybe 90% of the cabin. He'd built ladders and platforms where you could get up on a platform where it was above your height. And anyway, it was quite successful. And now he had a sealed cabin he'd put windows and doors in. He and I'd done that the summer before.
Just going back to the chinking, just so people know what that's all about, can you describe what that material is?
Well, it's basically a cement, but it's not as simple as that. It's there's some kind of a recipe that you do that, but if you think of it in terms of a light cement, that's what it is.
And that gets pushed in between all the logs.
Yeah, and you'd have a trowel and a piece of board with a handle on it. So you put the chink on top of that. You'd go to where you were working, and work it in and smooth it across. Mm-hmm. And it's not as difficult. The difficult part is having the right formula and doing the chink, making the chink properly. A lot of the people that were doing it would have never done it before and never done it since, but it all seemed to work. So
that's beautifully turned out.
Yeah, there were some spots that later basically professionals fixed, but that was probably 10% of the job.
So at this point, the building's back to almost the way it was originally.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now it was a cabin where you could go and sleep or go and sit and read, but you couldn't live there. So it's also at the same time in the mill, this partying's going on, and which is why Father originally got the idea of that cabin would look good if Mother and I could go over there. So Father decided, well, if we just put a little addition on, the addition could be a dining room, a kitchen, and a washroom. And then he thought, well, if we're doing one washroom, we might as well do a washroom on the second floor of the cabin. So that happened. And now they had their own little cabin that they could live in with their everything you needed to. The downstairs was a living room, the upstairs was a bedroom and a washroom, and the new addition was a dining room, kitchen, and another washroom. So it was very nice place. And they were only coming weekends, as they lived on a farm in Kitchener that they'd bought for investment purposes. So that went on for, I guess, 10 years. 1972, some businessmen bought a farm outside of New Dundee, and they were going to build the New Dundee Golf Course Country Club, which is there now. When they started taking the siding off the original farmhouse, it turned out to be a log cabin, about twice as big as the log cabin we had. And it was 3 stories, which is rare in a Ontario log cabin. And so Father bought that for $500. And then he had work done at the farm. He had met 2 Mennonite carpenters, Eldie and Sylvanus Shantz. Now, is that Mennonite? Eldie and Sylvanus. So they came down and looked at the project and started to work on it, bringing the mill from New Dundee to Port Stanley, building it. And so they'd live in the bedroom of the little cabin. Father did a deal with the lakeside restaurant where Eldie and Sylvanus could go for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Friday, Father would arrive and pay the Shantzes for their week, go down and settle with the Lakeview, and Monday, it started again. So Father also thought that Mother and Father were going to retire here, and it would be nice to double the size of the addition that was on the side of the little cabin. So they did that, Eldie and Sylvanus. They built the fireplace, they raised the cabin, and they doubled the size of the addition in between. And Mother and Father sold the farm and moved here, retired here permanently.
So they lived in the 2 cabins.
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess you kids, the 4 kids, would have the main mill house.
Yeah, as soon as Father could see what was happening, he gifted the mill to the 4 kids. And it stayed that 8 weeks in the summer, so the math is pretty easy. Each family would have 2 weeks. And in 1979, there was some awkwardness as there, I want the first 2 weeks of July. Well, I can't because my kids are in camp, all that stuff. It went well, but it's with 4 people carving up a building. My brother-in-laws, all buddies of mine, 2 of them were friends of mine before they met my 2 sisters and married them. Anyways, we were all at we had a little swimming pool beside the mill. We were all there on a Sunday afternoon. It was actually Monday of Labor Day. And we started talking about it. And I, as politely as I could, I said, my quarter will never be for sale. You should know my position. And I'd be happy to buy anybody's quarter. Anyway, Lois and I headed for Toronto. We were the first to leave. And that evening, my brother-in-law, Warren Moisey, arrived at our house with a sheet of foolscap. The top of it said Projecteers, the conditions under which the girls would sell the mill to you. So, and there were things like, we'd like 2 weeks holidays for 3 years, and we want 2 estimates and blah,
So
blah, blah.
just so we understand, so he arranged for the other 3 sisters to sell to you, all 3 of them.
Yeah, I don't think Warren did that. I think as soon as we left, the 3 girls started to talk, and
Okay.
I have no idea how the conversation went. I know the conclusion was favorable to us. I know that Warren, as an example, was raised on Lake Simcoe, which is a completely different cottage experience than being on what basically is a farm close to Lake Erie. It's just so he had limited interest in being here long term. And at the time, I think Ian Ross, who married my youngest sister, was a lawyer in Montreal. So the concept of owning a quarter of a property in Port Stanley was pretty wild. And all of us at that time were young, with young families and not a lot of money. And
But John, all your working life, you worked elsewhere. But what made you always so clear that you wanted to be in Port Stanley? You wanted to come back here. You wanted to keep your roots here, and so on.
I've thought about that, and I really don't know the answer. I was here when I was 1 year old. I was here every year of my life. I got to have friends here. It just was me. It's hard to. I knew Georgian Bay. I knew Muskoka. I knew Lake Simcoe. In the years that the mill was in the field, we rented a cottage at Big Bay Point in Lake Simcoe. So I knew what the other alternatives were. I always thought of this property as a farm near a lake, not a cottage on the water. So, and that's what it is.
You've also spoken quite fondly of your father many, many times. So you must have had a very strong connection here, and keeping this building
Yeah.
would connect you.
Yeah,
keep
good for
that
you.
connection.
That is true. And he would say things like, you kids will enjoy this. I'm doing this because you kids will enjoy this. This is forever. So it was sort of instilled in my brain that someone is going to have to step up and do this. And of the 4 of us, I was the obvious one. That's why Warren arrived with the letter, and the girls had all agreed. And that's why I had said my quarter will never be for sale. It was an inexplainable destiny that was in me.
Well, you listened to him when he said it was for you.
Well, he would never do that. He was that wasn't his style. It was always for the kids.
Right.
He would never.
But you've done something similar in that it's been your family place, and now tell us about that. The ownership of the property now, and
Well, it 2 years ago, I guess 3 years ago now, 2022, we gave the property to our daughter Jessica. So we have a son and a daughter. And I spoke with Adam about the prospect of me giving the mill to Jessica, and he agreed. He's a woodworker, builds tables, and as nice as the mill is, it's an expensive property to keep up, and Adam knew that. And to offset us giving the mill to Jessica, we bought Adam a farm south of Ingersoll. It's a 100-acre farm with a huge, huge workshop, heated workshop, which fits right in with what he's trying to do, is his woodworking business. So, and unhappily, he at the time he was in the midst of a divorce, which really complicates things. The mill wouldn't have been much fun for him alone being over there. So it's all worked out for the best.
You've got grandsons that come and use it and so on, much as you did probably at that age. Eh?
Yeah, Jessica's boys, it surprised me. It really surprised me what the good and the bad of what happens when you give a property, because they think they own it. So all of a sudden they're moving stuff that was, always valuable to me, not financially, but emotionally. Well, to them it was a zero. So I can remember going over and they had the trailer full of stuff, and before they could get the trailer going, I was picking off the odd item. Anyway, we got over that, but then their kids caught on to it immediately, and all of a sudden, Carter and his girlfriend arrived for the weekend. And it's all natural to them. It's something, and then growing up and adjusting that I have to do to get it. But they own it and they know it, and they're doing what they want. So
tell us about some of the family times you've had here over the years, because I think you've told us, and it's so interesting about the construction and the moving of the buildings and incredible projects that your dad dreamed up. But he had a lot of parties here. Your parents had a lot of parties. You've had lots of gatherings. I think, did one of your sisters get married here and so on?
Yeah, Judy was married where the swimming pool is. It's a blessed, sacred property. And of course the mill was where the reception was. Colleen and Mike were married at Christ Church, where mother and father were married. And we had a tent. We tented the tennis court. And so the reception was in the tennis court. Joanne was first married. She's the oldest. And we were living in Toronto, and she had a lot of Toronto friends. So her wedding and reception were in Toronto. And there were parties. There have been lots of parties here. When I was at university, Judy's a year younger, so we had friends that were the same friends she had were my friends, and vice versa. So we'd have a party here on Friday night or Saturday night. We both went to Western at the same time, so there was lots of. And then, as you pointed out earlier, mother and father, when they got to be sort of my age, they thought, father somehow came up with the idea of it's a later than you think party. So he actually sent out invitations. The top of it said, it's later than you think. If you were going to bring flowers at my funeral, bring a bottle and we'll celebrate. And he sent that invitation to friends from Toronto, friends from Kitchener, and obviously friends from Port Stanley, London. So there was quite a gang here for that. And then there have been parties here for mother's birthdays, June 30th. So obviously this would be where those parties went on, and always in the mill. I had my 80th party here in the mill 2 years ago. People from Toronto and London, so it's had its share of entertaining. I'm sure I've missed lots of. It's a perfect place to entertain, right? When we were kids, I made reference to this earlier, but on a Friday night we'd have 15 kids from Orchard Beach and Erie Rest. And we got into blackjack and that gambling where you spin the wheel and it stops. Anyway, and you drink some beer and you start at 7:30 or 8 and go till midnight.
So a lot of the local kids then, as well as the summer crowd?
No, it was pretty well summer crowd.
And did some of them stay around like you did?
Well, the ones that are still alive. Chris Scarf is still around. John Callahan's still around. As you know, Bob Anderson isn't still around, but he was a big part of it. Kathy Sullivan isn't around anymore. She was a big part of it. The Brennan girls, Margie and Mimi, they were a part of it. Bob and Bill Lowe were part of it. Bob's around, Bill isn't. Mike and Pete Baldwin. Mike isn't around, Pete is. So there was Nell Campbell, Archie Campbell.
It seems like Port Stanley, you were here in the summers, and the socializing wasn't just with summer people, it was more the Orchard Beach, Hillcrest people, and the people on the west side knew each other over there separately. Is that kind of the way it went?
Yeah, for sure. It almost two different social groups.
Yeah.
So we got to know, I dated Whitney Whip Horde for a while, so that got the two areas together a bit.
Would you spend time over on Main Beach with the?
A little bit. The only time we'd go to Main Beach was when it was rough and you could ride the waves, body surf.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, and getting Mackey's French fries, we wouldn't go over there, no. We went a lot to Orchard Beach. Orchard Beach has changed so much. You should try to get a picture of Orchard Beach in 1955 or 60. Because in front of those cottages, there was a beach. And there were two wooden piers. So in front of Sally Smith's cottage, which is now Callahan's, there was a wooden pier that would have been 15 feet wide and 70 feet long, going out into the water. And you could water ski off of that, the end of that pier. You could put one ski on and jump in the water when the boat took off. There were two of those piers, and there was probably 30 feet of sand before you started to go up to the cottages. Now, of course, it's all rocks and there's no beach at all. But it was that's where you went, and you could put a towel down, you could water ski, you could put a towel down on these big docks that were there. And it was quite a different scene than it is now. And I assume it's the lake and erosion.
What about the village itself? And I want to ask you about Levac's Bakery, because I think your family, like everybody in Port Stanley, loved soybean bread in those days. Tell us about that.
Well, it was a big part of our life. And when this cabin wasn't here, the Levacs are on East Street across from their home, was across from Extendicare. So Mrs. Levac, from her back window, could see the mill. So Mother and Mrs. Levac had a deal, whereas if Mother left the back light on, that means she wanted 4 loaves of soybean bread. Because if you were busy and didn't get down there till 10 o'clock, she was sold out. So that was our way of making sure we got, and then we'd head back to Toronto or Kitchener with enough soybean bread for the week. So it was a staple in our family for as long as I can remember. And nobody makes it like Levac's. You buy soybean bread anywhere else, it isn't the same taste as Levac's soybean bread.
And did your mother somehow wheedle the recipe from her?
Yeah, I have the recipe. Yeah. But if you have it now, don't you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and unfortunately, when you make the bread, it won't taste like Levac's. And
That's right.
I don't know what magic they had, but they gave us the recipe, and but they left something out so that it'd never be repeated. So.
Did you get time to go to the Stork Club?
I went to the Stork Club once with Chet Smith's daughter. Isn't that awful that I can't remember her name? Chet's wife was Ruth, but Penny Smith, she was my date, and we danced at the Stork Club, yeah.
Do you remember what band was playing that night?
I don't. It would, if it was a big name, I would probably remember, but they had bands there, as you know, all the time, and different bands, and sometimes they didn't have bands. So anyway, it was a great place. They always had the night I was there, they had a big crowd. And as you know, the LMPS used to come right down and make a turn across right to the historic club. So it was certainly a nice trip for people from London.
Did you ever use the train to go up to St. Thomas or London?
Never to London, but we did. We did go to St. Thomas for sure. We used to do it every year. At if you do it at Easter, they stop at Union, and there's a couple of guys dressed up
That's what they do now. Yeah.
as rabbits,
Yeah.
and they're Easter eggs, candy Easter eggs all over the ground. And so when the kids were young, we'd do that, and that was quite a nice trip.
Yeah.
So yeah, we did do that. So
What else, John? What about were there restaurants you went to when you were here, or did you just always eat at home? And
No,
as
we
a
went
teenager,
to-
what did you do here?
I think I think they're calling that restaurant on the corner of 782. Yeah, that was the lakeside, and we would go there, particularly if I was here with Father working. So let's say we came down Saturday morning and worked by noon. We didn't, we'd go there for lunch and probably for dinner. So we went there a lot. So I don't know what more I can.
I wanted to ask you. You said that you were doing water skiing off the pier.
Yeah,
So did somebody have a boat, or did you get out on boats for?
yeah,
lunch?
we all had boats.
Okay.
We had a boat. Bob Anderson always had a boat that was considerably better than ours. But Pete and Mike Baldwin had a boat. All of these boats were you could ski on. One year, the London Ski Club put a jump in the harbor, in the big open space, whatever you call that, a 6-foot ski jump. And it was all waxed, and they'd come down and practice jumping, but they weren't here during the week. So we were out there, and that was fun. It was interesting, the first couple of jumps. I remember I was sitting, there was a shelf underneath. So the jump is going like that, and then there's a platform where you could sit if you weren't skiing. So, and John Nash from London was up on the skis, and so they go around, and the boat goes by, and now you're waiting to hear the wooden skis hit the wooden platform. So we're waiting for that, and you don't hear that. You hear a clump, clump, clump.
Oh no.
So John had fallen right before the jump, rolled up the jump, and then dropped right in front of us. Anyway, he was a big, strong kid, and he wasn't hurt, but it was a scary part of what can happen with a ski jump.
So always motorboats. Were you ever sailing or anything on the lake as well?
Mike Baldwin had a sailboat, and I sailed with him a bit. My mother's brother, Jack Jennings, had a sailboat, and I sailed with him a bit. And the sailors aren't going to like this, but I found it painfully boring. You're out in the lake. I can remember being out in the lake, and it was either Mike or Uncle Jack, but they were looking at the speedometer, and they're saying, "We're doing 6 knots. I think if I tighten the sail, I could get it up to 7." Well, if you're a motorboat guy, going 7 knots is not knocking you out. So then you're out there for a couple of hours. Anyway, it wasn't for me, but I did go out.
You like to go out in the motorboats and go fast
Yeah, and water ski.
and water ski. Would you fish out there too?
We fished a lot. I bought a boat in, 35 years ago, whatever that is. A good, it's called a Limestone 24. It's a serious boat for fishing, and I'd go out, 10 miles, and troll with 200, 300 feet of line out for pickerel, and we'd I don't think we ever got skunked, but we'd come back with 5 to 10 nice pickerel and clean them at the barn. And
Makes for a nice meal. For
yeah,
sure.
yeah. If you're a real fisherman, trolling for pickerel, it really isn't the most exciting thing in the in the fishing world. They come in like a log. There's you get a big, good-sized pickerel. When he gets close to the boat, he'll kick around a bit, but it's nothing like being in Georgian Bay and catching a trout or another type of fish that
Puts up a better fight.
yeah, right off the bat, you're into action. So anyway, we did quite a bit of fishing. The boat's still there, and the kids use it a bit, but I haven't been on the boat for 2 years. This will be my 3rd year, and I'm not sure I know how to get. Well, I've got the leg problem, so getting in the boat might be tricky, but I should try it. It's a great boat.
It's nice to be out on the lake, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and in that limestone, those limestones are terrific boats. If you go to Georgian, you go to a place like Collingwood, the main marina in Collingwood, there'd be 10, 12 limestones. The only boat where there's 2 of the same, and there'd be like 10 of them. So they're perfect for big water like you get in Georgian Bay. So I'm down here, but one day I was down at Stan's Marina, and the OPP came in, and they're in a limestone, which of course is of some interest to me. So I went up to them and said, and it was a day that I knew the lake was rough. I said, "Where are you boys from?" And they said, "Well, we just came in from Port Dover." I said, "In that water?" And they said, "Yeah, it was pretty rough." I said, "Well, how big were the waves?" And they said, "They might have been 10 feet. And I said, "And the boat handled well?" And he said, "Oh yeah, that boat can go through anything." So I went into Stan and I repeated the conversation, and Stan said, "Well, it's a great story, but there have never been 10-foot waves on Lake Erie." So, well, I don't know what the waves were, but I can guarantee you they weren't 10 feet. So anyway, they're great, they're good boats. Half the limestones made went to OPP and people like that, water safety crews, and so.
You were talking about fishing, John, and I'm just wondering, when you were here for the summers, was your family often buy fish from the fishermen coming in? Was that a regular part of your diet down here?
Well, certainly buying from Jackson's
Yeah.
was a regular part, yeah. And fishing, your cousin and I fished these streams.
My cousin Peter?
Yeah, all the time. You all you need is a fishing line and a hook and a piece of bacon, and these streams are all they're chub, and a big chub would be 7 inches, an average chub would be 5 inches, and you don't eat them, but if you're 12 years old, that's entertainment. Following the river up and looking for a pool, and we did that with some regularity.
That's what kids did in the summertime.
Absolutely,
back then.
Absolutely.
What other sort of things would you do as a kid? We know you helped your dad quite a bit.
Yeah, and I was in the woods with kids, with Pete Sanders. I don't know what we were doing. We were bow and arrow. We had BB guns. We were, I hate to admit it, but we would use a BB gun to shoot at squirrels and groundhogs and whatever we could. And we actually stayed overnight. We had a tent. And there's a nice spot down on Little Creek where it flattens out with a big willow tree. And it's a perfect place to put a tent. And we did that, maybe 2 years once or twice in the summer. So you'd have a fire going and you'd have marshmallows and tell stories and be boys, you know. It was good.
And the summers would go pretty quick, I would bet.
Yeah, yeah. I also went to camp. Pete Sanders and I went to Pinecrest together one year for, I think it was, 3 weeks. So, and in Toronto, I belonged to the Rosedale Sea Scouts, and that was spectacular. The guy who ran the Sea Scouts had his own yacht, and he kept it at Penetang. So a summer camping with him, you drove to Penetang, got on the boat, went to the north shore of Georgian Bay, and he had already scouted an area where it was flat. So we put up, I don't know, 5 or 7 big tents, and there were probably 20 of us on the boat. And he had taken canoes up earlier, and so you'd go from there. You'd go on canoe trips, all part of first class journey and all those badges you get when you're in Scouts. So it was, now, not a glamorous story, but on one of these trips, we went up in May to scout out what we were going to do that summer, and I was on that group, and we stopped outside of Killarney, and we were going to be there for the night. So Dave Mabey and I borrowed a canoe off the main boat and went into shore, and we had firecrackers in our pocket, and of course we were both smoking cigarettes. You know, that's what you did when you were 14 in downtown Toronto. So we started climbing up this huge cliff, and we were lighting off these bloody firecrackers, and we were smoking. And by the time we got to sort of the top of this cliff, the guys on the boat were screaming at us, and they were pointing halfway down the cliff. There was a fire going. So Mabey and I ran down, and before I could control Mabey, he picked up this great big log that was smoldering and threw it over. So now it dropped on all the shelves on the way down. Now we had the whole side of the mountain burning with a wind blowing. It was crazy. So we got down, got in the canoe, and got back to the boat. The skipper had already called the OPP and the fire guys, and they were coming out with we left. We waited till the pumps, you know, they got the huge pumps, and the firemen were going up the side of this, I call it a mountain, but it was a steep cliff, probably 80 yards high, maybe 100 yards high. Anyway, they had these big pumps putting the fire out. And so once it was under control, we headed out, and I said to the skipper, "What do you think's going to happen to me?" And I know he was trying to scare me, and he said, "Well, you'll probably go to juvenile court, and they'll assess you the cost that this is going to cost them to put this fire out. You and maybe you'll have to split it. So your parents are going to be out some serious dough." And that was enough to, that's not the kind of stuff my dad liked. So anyway, we never heard a thing from anybody. I think it was Skipper trying to add to the lesson I should have learned. But it...
it was accidental.
Yeah. Smoking with firecrackers was accidental. Yeah. Anyway, it was one of life's experiences.
Well, I think that was a very informative talk that you gave us today, and I want to thank you very much, John, for doing that for us.
I could just conclude, Port Stanley's been marvelous to our family. You know, my parents being married here and always being a part of it, and now it's been so important to me, and obviously will continue with Jessica, and her kids are already view themselves as Port Stanley kids. It's a marvelous place. I just hope they stop building houses.
Well, you and your dad, and your family has certainly contributed a lot to maintaining some beautiful structures here.
Yeah. Well, we're very proud of it. We're very happy that we've been able to do that. Yeah. Thank you very much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you, John. It's been wonderful.